Thank you for joining us today. We're going to be starting the webinar around 10 o'clock. So sit tight and we'll be starting soon. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We're going to be getting started around 10 o'clock. We're giving folks a little bit of time to log into Zoom this morning. So sit tight. If you have any issues with audio or connection, please let us know through Q&A. Hopefully my audio is coming in loud and clear. We've been trying to test it this morning, but please let us know if things are not coming through. Again, just sit tight. We'll be starting in a few minutes. All right. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. You are attending the State Water Board's webinar on our proposed updates for the 2024 Drinking Water Needs Assessment. My name is Kristen Appold. I am the senior for the Needs Analysis Unit within the Division of Drinking Water, and our unit is responsible for conducting the annual Drinking Water Needs Assessment. So let's get started. I want to talk a little bit about meeting logistics. Let's get this. We have a smaller group with us today, which is great. That does allow for more opportunities for conversation and recommendation sharing. We have participation through Zoom and through our EPA live webcast. We're going to have a discussion at the end of the presentation where folks will have an opportunity to ask questions and provide feedback. If you are participating via Zoom, you can either raise your hand and share your question or comment using your own voice, which we definitely encourage. And when we call on you, we'll allow you to unmute yourself. You can also put your question or comment in the Q&A box. So if you are in Zoom, you should see in your menu a Q&A button. And if you click on that, it'll open up a window that will allow you to enter in your question or comment. And when we stop at the end of the presentation to have that discussion, we'll read out your question or comment to the group and respond the best way we can. If you are participating through our live EPA webcast, you can also email us at safer@waterboards.ca.gov. We do have folks who are monitoring that inbox and will share that with us so we can read out your question or comment to the rest of the group and again, respond as best as we can. If we're not able to get to your question or comment today during the webinar, we will follow up with you over email or try to schedule a call so that we can learn more about your feedback. What are we going to cover today? We have a robust agenda. We're going to cover a lot of different components of the drinking water needs assessment. We're going to discuss some of our proposed updates to how we identify failing water systems. We're going to discuss the changes that we're proposing for our cost assessment and share the preliminary results of that assessment utilizing our proposed changes. We're going to talk briefly about the risk assessments and the affordability assessment, and then discuss next steps. So let's dive in. Our drinking water needs assessment is composed of 4 core pieces of analysis. The goal of the needs assessment is to identify drinking water needs throughout the state and to quantify those using data. This information then is used to help the State Water Board implement the SAFER program and other programs throughout the Division of Drinking Water and our colleagues that we work with in other divisions, or I'm sorry, other agencies across the state on drinking water issues. We look at failing water systems, so those water systems that are meeting our failing criteria. We also conduct a risk assessment of public water systems and state smalls and domestic wells, trying to identify locations and water systems throughout the state that may be at risk of failing. We then try to develop a statewide price tag with our cost assessment, identifying the costs associated with implementing long-term and interim solutions for our failing and at-risk systems. And then we also conduct an affordability assessment, trying to identify those communities that may struggle to pay for those interim and long-term solutions identified by our analysis. This work is not meant to be a guide for local decision-making, but it is meant to help the state agencies and our county colleagues in helping with our planning activities around where we engage with folks, how we budget and plan for helping implement these long-term solutions. So I'm going to first talk about our failing water system list criteria. Our failing list criteria is applied only to our community water systems and K through 12 schools. We are looking for those water systems that are regulated by the State Water Board that are out of compliance or consistently out of compliance with drinking water regulations. These are systems that are our top priority. I want to caveat by saying that our failing water system list does not necessarily mean that these water systems are delivering unsafe drinking water to customers, although some of them are. It may mean that these systems, again, have consistently been out of compliance, and therefore we consider those failing systems. Failing systems are our top priority in our SAFER program. Those are communities that we think need to be prioritized first when it comes to where we prioritize our funding and our technical resources and our staffing resources. We've been tracking our failing water systems that are meeting the criteria that I'm about to discuss since 2017. We have this data available. If you ask for it, we can provide it. But we do post the current list of failing water systems on our website in a few different places, and it's updated daily. So we do have a dashboard called the Safer Dashboard, which the screen grab on the left is from, which shows the water systems that are meeting our failing criteria every day. If you were to click on any of those locations, you would see why that water system is failing and more information about that water system. We also started publishing earlier this year the failing list to the data.ca.gov portal, where you could tap into this data if you want to work with it in a more robust fashion. I know this is a busy slide, but wanted to talk about what our criteria is for identifying failing water systems. It has evolved over the past few years since we started tracking failing water systems. In the beginning, in 2017, our failing criteria was only looking at primary and secondary MCL violations with open enforcement actions. I want to emphasize that there has to be a violation and an open enforcement action to get water systems on the list for this criteria. An open enforcement action means that the State Water Board, as the regulatory agency, is requiring the water system take an action to come back into compliance. And we're not going to close out that enforcement action and get the water system off the list until they have taken that required action. In 2021, we expanded the failing criteria to include more than just water quality violations. We did add E. coli violations with an open enforcement action, but we also included treatment technique violations and monitoring and reporting violations. This criteria is a little bit more complicated. For a treatment technique violation, if there is one that is open, so there's an open enforcement action, the water system is added to the list. And if there is a system that has 3 or more treatment technique violations, then that water system is on the failing list, regardless of whether or not they've come back into compliance. It is an indicator of perhaps managerial or technical failure on behalf of the water system, and therefore is a water system we're going to want to be checking in with more frequently. A water system that has had 3 or more monitoring and reporting violations within the last few years, where they have a violation that has an enforcement action that's been open for 15 months or greater, is also on our failing list. These are water systems that are not able to get their water quality testing results in, and therefore it's difficult for the State Water Board to confirm with certainty that their water is safe and meeting standards. And that is why those monitoring reporting violations were added back in 2021. What we are proposing, though, for 2024 is to expand the failing criteria to, for the first time ever, add water systems to our failing list that have water outages or source capacity violations. These are water systems that are running out of water or are unable to consistently meet the demand of their customers. This was a pretty big issue during the last drought, and these water systems were not being added to the failing list at that time because we did not have the appropriate violation codes and tracking system in order to add them. We've been making a lot of changes to our data systems and how we issue our violations and enforcement actions in order to ensure that these systems can be added to the failing list. And more importantly, we want to make sure that they can be removed once they've come back into compliance. So we're going to talk a little bit about this new failing category today and what the Water Board is proposing for our failing criteria. Let's talk about this new category, water shortage and water outage violations. We're adding a few violation codes that capture those systems that are struggling to meet demand or have had a severe water outage. So you'll see here some of the violation codes that we use within our data system to identify those systems that are experiencing these challenges. These are the codes that our script looks at to add water systems to the list if they have an open enforcement action. I won't go into the details here, but if you're interested in learning more, we do have a white paper that has a bit more information about these. While we're going in and updating the failing criteria, we wanted to make a few additional changes to make sure that our failing criteria is adequately identifying our failing water systems. We have a few violation numbers and codes that we wanted to add in there just to make sure that it's more robust, and some that should be removed because they were included to capture perhaps data entry errors. And I'll go over what I mean by that. It's a little convoluted. But we are proposing to add a few other violation codes to some of the other categories. We're adding one violation code in the primary MCL violation category around MCL violations for water systems using POE or POU. These are decentralized treatment devices, point of use and point of entry. I won't go through each one of these because it'll take a little bit of time, and this is documented in our white paper, which is posted on our website, and I can share with you all via email after this. But we are recommending adding a few more treatment technique violation codes to the list that we're already including. Some of these are around maximum disinfection residual level for chlorine, you can see here. We are adding some codes that will come into effect around lead and copper. We're not using these yet, but we're putting them in here to prepare for starting to use them in the future. We're adding a few more monitoring and reporting violation codes, some of them related to the drought and conservation work that we're doing. Just kind of leaving these on the screen so you can go through them a little bit. Let's talk about the ones that we're removing. So when we expanded our failing criteria back in 2021 and we wanted to capture water systems that had E. coli violations and open enforcement actions, we noticed in our data that we had some of our districts and our LPAs were using different E. coli violation codes to capture these types of violations that typically we wouldn't encourage our staff to use. So these violation numbers 01, 02, and T1. We have one violation code and number that we want our staff to be using. And so we're going to be removing these from our script to identify these systems with these violations and try to move things over to the one violation number that should be used for E. coli violations. This is essentially a data cleanup on our end. But wanted to make sure that we were transparent about this data cleanup effort that we're undertaking. And then we are removing a monitoring and reporting violation code that we had added back in 2021, but it doesn't really align with the type of monitoring and reporting violations that we have in the failing criteria. So this one was code number 66, which was failure to provide lead consumer notice. We don't have any of the other monitoring and reporting violations around failure to notify in that category. So to be consistent, we wanted to remove it. I will say though, when we make those changes in our script today to see what impact it would have on our failing list, we don't have any water systems currently with that violation number 66, adding them to the failing list right now, so it has no impact list. We do have one system on the failing list with one of those older E. coli violation codes that would come off. So we're working with the LPA to see what we can do about that one water system. But all of those other additions that I talked about earlier would add, if we were again to implement those changes today, would add 19 water systems to the failing list. The vast majority of those 18 would be for the new source capacity and water outage violation category. So not a dramatic change to the list, but we do anticipate in the future, if we were to experience another big drought again, we would have more water systems getting onto the failing list due to these new source capacity and water outage violations. Okay. So that was some of the proposed changes to our failing criteria. Not going to have a significant impact on our failing list, but it will add a few systems. And most importantly, I think prepare us better for when we experience another big drought again. Now I'm going to pivot and talk a little bit about some of the changes that we're making to our cost assessment. So just to rehash, the cost assessment again is developing a big price tag, if you will, trying to identify how much it may cost across the state to implement long-term and interim solutions for our failing and at-risk systems. It's not supposed to be a guide for individual communities on what kind of long-term solutions they should implement. It's supposed to be a bit of a costing exercise so we understand what the budgetary needs are to address the drinking water challenges that we're identifying. We are directed by SB 200 to do this cost assessment. We are required to figure out our estimated anticipating funding needs. So that is why we do this. And again, it is meant to just be a tool to help us think through what we're seeing across the state and how we can better address the needs that are out there. We conducted our first cost assessment in 2021 and released it with the 2021 needs assessment. We haven't conducted a full cost assessment since 2021, and we've been in the process of rebuilding our cost model and updating it for the past 2 years. One of the really big changes that we needed to accommodate in the new cost model compared to what we had in the previous one for 2021 was taking into consideration new challenges identified by the needs assessment that did not exist in the 2021 model. I'm seeing a note saying that my audio is breaking up a little bit. I'm going to try to speak more clearly and closer to the microphone. If this is a consistent issue, please put another comment in the Q&A box and we'll see what we can do on our end. But thank you for that. So again, like I mentioned before, when I talked about our failing criteria back in 2021, our failing water systems were only failing for primary and secondary MCL violations, so water quality issues. We have been expanding the failing criteria since 2021, and you can see that we now have systems failing for E. coli violations, treatment technique violations, and monitoring and reporting violations. These are not all water quality based, and therefore we needed to think a little bit more creatively for our cost model about what long-term solutions we should be looking at for those communities. We're still including our at-risk public water systems, and the categories for risk have remained the same. But we have made some pretty big changes to our risk assessment for state smalls and domestic wells. We are looking at water. Back in 2021, we only looked at water quality risk for these locations, and therefore our long-term solutions were around treatment. But now we have drought risk in our risk assessment, and we've identified state small water systems and domestic wells that are high risk for drought. And therefore, again, we needed to think about different long-term solutions for these communities. So that is some of the drivers for why we've had to rebuild our cost model. So let's first take a look at how the cost model looks at long-term solutions for all these different system types. First, it's important to look at how we used to do things in the 2021. In the 2021 model, what we did is we looked at a bunch of different long-term solutions at the same time for these different system types. And in the 2021 model, the core long-term solutions were treatment, centralized treatment, decentralized treatment, which is point of use, point of entry, and physical consolidation. So what the model did was it calculated the costs associated with all of these different options. and then compared those different costs and their long-term sustainability metrics to then identify the best long-term solution for that system, again, in the model. But what we noticed is that based on the decision-making criteria for step 2, that the model was over-selecting the lowest cost option, which oftentimes was decentralized treatment, over the more sustainable long-term solutions like physical consolidation and centralized treatment. And so it led to the model results in 2021 over-selecting POU, POE, and under-selecting physical consolidation. We got a lot of feedback in 2021 saying, hey, that looks a little off. And internally, it didn't really align with the SAFER program's priorities, which are to help advance physical consolidation and help bring economies of scale to our smaller water systems. So when we looked at rebuilding the cost model, we wanted to change the decision-making logic within the model to more closely align with our SAFER program priorities. So the first thing that we do when we're looking at long-term solutions for our failing water systems is we look at physical consolidation first. We're not comparing it to anything else. We're looking at physical consolidation and we're looking at distance criteria and cost viability criteria. And if that water system is meeting those different criteria, we're going to select physical consolidation for that water system in the model, regardless of any other possible solutions, because this is the best long-term, most sustainable solution for that community within the model. Again, I have to keep stressing that it's within a model and it's not decision-making for any local system. If physical consolidation is not viable and the water system is failing for water quality related issues, we then look at to see if centralized treatment is viable. If centralized treatment is not viable within the model, we then look at our decentralized treatment option. Again, what you can see here from step 1, 2 to 3 is we're looking at our most preferred, most sustainable long-term solution down to perhaps the least sustainable option within the model. And then what we do for our failing systems is if we look at additional needs. So you saw that our failing criteria, if we have a system that's failing for monitoring and reporting violations, they don't need treatment. We're going to go from step 1 to step 4. We look to see if there's any additional needs that they may need to be sustainable to help them get off the failing list. So maybe they need some technical assistance. Maybe they need some administrator assistance. We look at other essential infrastructure as well to help make those systems more sustainable in the long run. Now let's look at what the model looks at for long-term solutions for our at-risk public water systems. We also look to see if physical consolidation is viable first. Because these water systems are at risk and not failing for water quality issues or anything else, we don't look at treatment for these water systems. We assume that they have treatment in place or treatment is not needed. So the model then looks at additional long-term solutions for these systems like technical assistance or administrator assistance, but we skip the treatment steps for our at-risk water systems in the model. Okay, this is where things got a bit more complicated. So our state smalls and domestic well systems, again, back in 2021, they were only at risk for water quality issues. Therefore, the model only looked at treatment options and physical consolidation. We've had to really think this through a little bit differently for the new model. This one, again, not many changes because it's water quality, but you guessed it, we're looking at physical consolidation first. If that's not viable, we then look at decentralized treatment. And if that's not viable, which is worst case scenario, we see in their modeled water quality that it is above a contamination level that could be treated by decentralized treatment. We are then looking at bottled water for these communities, which is not our ideal long-term solution. This is the new one. So these are our state smalls and domestic wells that are high risk for water shortage. Again, you guessed it, we looked at physical consolidation first, and if that's not viable, this is brand new for our model, we're looking at the construction of a new well for these state smalls and domestic wells. So if you remember, and I'll just go back real fast. For at-risk water systems, you see steps 2 here is additional needs. And for our failing water systems, again, step 4 here is additional needs. Let's talk about what that is. So additional long-term solutions that we look at and try to match to our failing and at-risk water systems is something we call other essential infrastructure. We look at the data that we have on these water systems and we look to see if they need additional meters for their customers. We look at whether or not they need replacement public supply wells because they're nearing the end of their useful life, or they don't have a backup supply. We look at whether or not they need additional storage. We look at whether or not they need other pieces of infrastructure that would help make those systems more sustainable. We then also look to see who may need technical assistance or administrator assistance. And this is all fully documented in our white papers, and we have PowerPoint presentations on our website. We're not going to go into the details here because it gets a bit wonky. However, if you're interested in learning more about this, we are hosting a webinar today at 1 p.m. to dig into our model's assumptions and cost criteria for other essential infrastructure, technical assistance, and administrator assistance. The webinar that we're hosting at 1 p.m. is also going to be digging into our interim solutions methodology. So I'm going to go over this at a high level today during this webinar, but if you want to get into the weeds with us, join us at 1 p.m. today. So for interim solutions, we look at interim solutions for our disadvantaged communities that are served by failing public water systems or high-risk state smalls or domestic. So these are communities that are perhaps not being served safe drinking water right now, and they're disadvantaged, which means it may be difficult for them to afford interim solutions while long-term solutions are being implemented, which is why we wanted to put a price tag on this, since the State Water Board does have programs in place to try to provide interim solutions for these types of communities. So we look at whether or not decentralized treatment is a viable interim solution for these systems. And if it's not, then we look at bottled water as an interim solution. Our model does include different time frames for different system types for these different solutions, and that's all documented in our white paper. And again, we're going to go over that today at 1 p.m. if you're interested. We've gone through quite a lot of research and outreach to try to update all of our cost assumptions in the model. So everything that I've discussed today, looking at physical consolidation to treatment and decentralized treatment, bottled water, we have been looking at not only the projects that the State Water Board has been funding over the past few years to dig out cost information. We've looked at all the documentation that we did to develop our first model in 2021. We've done significant outreach to vendors and consulting firms within the state of California to get quotes for different cost components. And we've reached out to individual water systems to collect and confirm cost data. All of our research has been documented in the white papers that we've been publishing over the last 2 years and soliciting public feedback on. This has been a collaborative process with our stakeholders. We've been asking for cost data and feedback on our cost assumptions in a hope to get to a really good output from this assessment that really captures the full cost of implementing these solutions. Which is why I'm going to put another plug in for our webinar today. It's our last one in the series. We are going to be going over some of our updated cost assumptions for interim solutions and some of those other long-term solutions I mentioned. And if you have feedback for us, we're hoping to collect data and information from you over the next month. We're going to make sure that that email is shared with you afterwards that has a link to today's 1 p.m. webinar if you're not familiar with it. We do have all of our white papers and webinar presentations and recordings from those previous cost model workshops posted on our website, but I'm putting the links in this PowerPoint to make it a little bit easier to find. It's never too late to provide feedback on what we're proposing within the model. There's been a lot of interest in how we conduct the physical consolidation component of the analysis that's fully documented and available online. But drum roll, we wanted to conduct some preliminary cost assessment analysis for discussion purposes. We're making a bunch of updates to how we conduct this analysis and wanted to compare it to the 2021 numbers so that folks have an idea of how all of these changes and updates get wrapped up at the end and how they compare to what we had in 2020. So bear with me. I know there's a lot of numbers. And again, this is all published on our website if you want to sit with a cup of coffee and take a look. But these are the counts of long-term solutions between what our new model, the blue table at the top, how that compares to the counts from the 2021. You heard me mention before that the old model was under-selecting physical consolidation and over-selecting decentralized treatment for a lot of our public water systems. You can see in that gray box here, it was 20% for physical consolidation and 35% for decentralized treatment. If you then compare that to the first row in the table on the top, we have 43% for physical consolidation and 6% for decentralized treatment. So our team is pretty proud of those results. We think that achieved one of the core goals in our cost model rebuild. Another thing I wanted to point out in the numbers here is that compared to 2021, we have a much higher number of high-risk state smalls and domestic wells included in this analysis. You can see almost double the state smalls and again, more than double for our domestic wells. And this is because we are including high-risk locations for both water quality risk and water shortage risk. And so that's really changed, the count of systems in the analysis, which does run the numbers up more than what we saw in 2021. You can see on the far right, we've got new private well, which did not exist in the model in 2021. And you can see that we're costing out a new private well for 36% of our high-risk domestic wells. So what does this equate to dollar-wise when we run the analysis with all of our updated cost assumptions? You'll see here that the total estimated cost goes from $4.56 billion to double, nearly $10.6 billion. A good chunk of that increase comes from the new private well cost estimate for domestic wells and state smalls, which is at nearly $2.9 billion in this preliminary analysis. In our white paper for our workshop that we're hosting this afternoon, we do include an appendix with a lot more breakdown of this data. If you're interested in digging in, we have that all documented and ready for you all to digest. So this is our long-term cost estimates for our different systems. Now I'm going to talk about our interim. Our interim solutions, again, because we have higher systems, the numbers are up. For failing public water systems, we do see a bit of a difference here. There's 47% of failing systems included in our interim solutions analysis compared to 65%. Again, this kind of changes as our failing water system list changes between how many DAC and SDAC or disadvantaged communities have included. But we do have a much higher count of state smalls and domestic wells that are being modeled for interim solutions. In 2021, the data that we had from our contractors that we worked with, it didn't disaggregate decentralized and bottled water counts. So I apologize for not being able to provide that breakdown here, but we don't have that data available to us. Again, lots of numbers. I'll try to highlight some of the ones to take a quick look at, but again, feel free to digest it at your own pace. When we look at first year interim solution costs, that's that blue highlight, so that first table on the top, we're looking at $362 million for all of our systems. And if you compare that to the first year for the 2021, it's about $100 million higher. Where you're going to see quite a big difference, though, is our full duration cost estimate. So that's the purple highlight, that middle table. The total full duration cost estimate in our new model is around $514 million compared to nearly double in 2021. One of the big changes that we're proposing for the cost model is to cut the full duration assumptions in our model down from what they were in 2021. In 2021, the model assumed 9 years, up to 9 years of interim assistance. But based on our funding data that we have within our emergency programs, our interim assistance really is only going out 2 to 3 years. So to better align with the realities that we're seeing through our funding programs, we're recommending that we update the cost model to reduce that full duration of interim assistance, which is why you see the numbers are going down here compared to 21. And it's really one of the only places you're seeing the numbers go down. So I appreciate you bearing with me. I know looking at these tables can be a bit dizzying. I will say that, what we're seeing across the board, obviously, are prices going up. And a lot of that is driven by labor costs going up. We're seeing the prices of materials skyrocketing with high levels of inflation. Just across the board, prices are a lot higher today than they were when we were doing this data collection effort back in 2019 for the 2021 model. However, if you feel like any of our cost numbers look a little off to you when you dig in, please give us feedback and let us know. We do update component costs based on data availability. So please give us any recommendations you have. We want to make sure that our numbers are as close to accurate as they can be for a statewide model like this. Okay, so that is our big change for this year. For the 2024 needs assessment, we've been really focusing our team's effort on getting the cost model updated and making sure that it's working and the output aligns with expectations. On the risk assessment and affordability assessment side, we aren't making any changes this year. So we're talking about these two here. So our risk assessment methodology for state smalls and domestic wells is going to stay the same. We are going to be doing data refreshes so that the results of that analysis are up to date given current data. But we aren't proposing to change any of the metrics or anything that we're looking at for the risk assessment. And it's twofold. One is because we've obviously been busy with the cost model. But second, it's good to try to maintain the methodology from year to year so that we can look at trends over time. It's difficult when we make big changes to these methodologies from one year to the next because we can't really compare apples to apples from year to year if we keep doing that. So again, our risk assessments are going to be static for 2021 with some data refreshes. We're also not going to be proposing any methodology changes for our affordability assessment. These metrics that we're looking at are going to be the same as what they were in 2023. We're just going to be refreshing the calculations given the new data that we've collected this past year. We have been updating our risk assessment and affordability assessment analysis online. If you're familiar with our dashboards, those are updated on a quarterly basis now. So if you want to take a look at what those numbers are currently, you can check out the dashboard. They don't change too dramatically from one data refresh to the next. So we don't anticipate the numbers changing a whole lot compared to last year. Okay, next steps, and then we'll get into discussion. We are looking for feedback on everything that we talked about today. So our failing criteria expansion and edits and our cost model rebuild. We have been hosting and continue to host this afternoon workshops on our cost model rebuild, and we'd love your feedback or any data or information you can share to help us make that more robust. We have tried to be as transparent as possible around all of the changes and updates we're making. Our white papers are long, I apologize, but they are thorough. They include our formulas, our cost assumptions, how we got to our cost assumptions, and lots of references. So take a look, dig in. They are on our website. We're looking for final feedback from folks by January 19th. That gives us a very short period of time to then conduct the full 2024 needs assessment, which we try to publish in April. So we are hoping for your feedback by the 19th. You can email us at safer@waterboards.ca.gov. I'm going to open discussion. I'm going to ask folks who are with us on Zoom, please raise your hand if you have any questions or comments. And then I'm also going to go through the inbox, our Q&A, and I'm going to ask my team to look at our email inboxes to see if we have anything. All right, as I wait for anyone to raise their hand, I'm going to look at the Q&A. A few folks on my audio, so hopefully I'm coming in clearer. I have a question on whether or not the slides are available. Yes, they are already posted on our website. If you go to the Drinking Water Needs Assessment webpage, you'll find them posted, but we'll also email those hyperlinks out to everybody after this webinar concludes this morning. And if you want to preview, the PowerPoint slides for the 1 o'clock webinar are also posted already. Danielle's asking, what current metric will you use to assess at risk for the new criteria, especially source capacity and outage violations, if you're not looking to update the risk assessment? So Danielle, I didn't include it in here because it would be too long, but we updated the risk assessment indicator last year to include source capacity and water outage violations. So it's kind of regardless of whether or not there's an open enforcement action. If a water system has had source capacity, water outage violations, or bottled water or hauled water reliance over the last few years, they get risk points. The new failing criteria goes beyond that. You have to have an open enforcement action to be on the failing list. So that kind of elevates you to failing. But you still get dinged in the risk assessment if you've been accruing some of those violations over the last few years. Hopefully I answered your question. If not, please provide another one, or you can raise your hand and we can have a conversation about it. All right, doesn't look like we have any questions in our SAFER inbox. Sarah is asking, how do you gather data on private domestic wells? That's an excellent question, Sarah. And again, that is documented in all of our methodologies in our needs assessment papers. But for domestic wells and state smalls, as you guessed, there is not a lot of direct locational data available for these communities. What we do is a little different than what we do for public water systems, because we do get data directly from our water systems. For state smalls and domestic wells, we take available data. So for example, we do have some water quality data from some domestic wells. It's a very small fraction. We also have water quality data from monitoring wells and other public supply wells that are at the depth that most private wells would be at. We take that known water quality data from those locations and we model out what water quality might be within a 1 mile radius from those locations. We use that to create what we call the aquifer risk map. And that's how we identify locations throughout the state where there are domestic wells and state smalls that may be at high risk for water quality contamination. It is modeled water quality data, so it's not accurately reflecting what is at that one location. So that's why we always say, this is a model. It's not based on real data. That's how we do our water quality risk. And again, that is in our report online. For water shortage, we work with our colleagues at the Department of Water Resources. They conduct a statewide water shortage risk analysis where they're looking at a lot of different metrics from precipitation and heat trends to past drought conditions. They also use data. There are some domestic wells that report to DWR where they've gone dry. And all of that data is then used by DWR to model out where there is high water shortage risk across the state. And that we use that data set to identify our high risk state smalls and domestic wells on the water shortage category. So that's how we identify our category risk. That data, again, is modeled data using the limited data that we do have our hands on. Now, in terms of locational data, we did a county outreach effort a few years ago to start getting an updated inventory of state small water systems from our counties. And so we use that locational data for our state small database. For domestic wells, we use the locational information from OSCR, which is the online well completion report system where well drillers have to submit the well drilling report to DWR once a new well's been drilled. That's the location data we use for domestic wells. I think it's worth noting, though, that that database is not complete. It's not we have no statewide database that has all domestic well locations in it. The OSCR system came into effect a few decades ago, but so any legacy wells built a long time ago are not in there. And so we think that our domestic well count and what we include in our analysis maybe only represents a third of domestic wells that are in use throughout the state. So we always say, keep that in mind when looking at our analysis. It's probably undercounting on the domestic well side. So Sarah, I hope that provides at least a high level answer to your question. If you're interested in the specifics, though, I can dive in with you later and point you to all of our resources that we have in our methodology documents. Okay. I don't see anyone's hand raised, and I encourage anyone on this call to raise your hand and share your voice opinion on what you think about these proposed changes or updates, or if you have any general feedback on the drinking water needs assessment, we'd love to hear from you. Okay. Don't see any hands, and we have no questions in the Q&A box. I'm going to sit tight for another 2 minutes. And if I don't see any activity, then I'm going to call it a day. And I'll thank everybody for joining us. Really appreciate your participation in the drinking water needs assessment. We are constantly trying to think about how we can improve it so that it's more accurate. We really want to have data-driven, informed decision-making happening here at the state. And we're hoping that our data and our analysis helps achieve that. All right, everyone, let's just call it a day. Thank you all for joining us. Really appreciate it. We'll make sure we share the links to the white papers, the PowerPoint presentations, and information about the webinar today at 1 o'clock. If you have any feedback or questions for us, please don't ever hesitate to reach out to us. We love talking about this stuff. It's super wonky, but it's super fun. And happy holidays to everybody. Take care.